They were fine. That is the part that needs to be understood before anything else. Not performing fine, actually fine, or close enough to find that the difference was undetectable from the inside. The walls were back up. The self-sufficiency narrative was running. The life had reorganized itself around the new configuration, the one that did not include you, and the reorganization had produced something that functioned, that moved forward, that looked from every available angle like someone who had made a decision and was living it. The distance was doing what distance always does for the avoidant, working. The alarm had quieted. The pressure of intimacy, the specific low-level, always present cost of being close to someone who was real to them, had lifted. The morning routine was uninterrupted by the particular weight of someone else's emotional weather. The evenings were theirs in the uncomplicated way that solitude is uncomplicated when it has been chosen rather than experienced as a wound. They were managing, and then you did something. Not something dramatic, not a grand gesture or a confrontation or a declaration that demanded a response. Not the kind of move that appears in the fantasy version of this moment. The perfectly timed, perfectly worded expression of everything that should have been said, landing with cinematic precision at the exact moment it would produce the most impact. Something quieter than that. Something that did not announce itself as significant. Something that looked, from the outside, almost ordinary, and it broke something in them. Not broke in the catastrophic sense. Not a collapse, not a breakdown, not anything that was visible on the surface in the way that dramatic things are visible. Broke in the specific interior, foundational sense of something that had been load-bearing, quietly cracking under a weight it had not anticipated. Their reality, the reality they had constructed carefully and deliberately around not needing you, broke. And understanding how one move does that and why it works when nothing else does, and what it means for everything that comes after. That is what this is. The reality they built after you, before getting to the move, the reality it broke needs to be understood, because the breaking only makes sense in the context of what was being broken. When the avoidant retreats, when they create the distance, when the relationship is ended or suspended, or allowed to atrophy into something unrecognizable, they do not simply experience the absence of you. They construct an alternative reality, an interior architecture designed specifically to make the distance sustainable. This construction is not cynical. It is not a deliberate manipulation of truth. It is the psyche doing what psyches do when they need to survive something. It builds a story, a coherent, internally consistent, emotionally manageable story about what happened and why and what it means. The story has specific elements. It has a version of the relationship that is smaller than what the relationship actually was. Not false, exactly, but edited. The complications amplified, the incompatibilities made central, the moments of genuine meeting allowed to recede, while the moments of friction are held in the foreground. The relationship, in this constructed version, was real but limited, good in places, not good enough to have warranted the cost of staying. It has a version of you that is similarly edited, not diminished in the cruel sense, but made more ordinary than you actually are. The specific, irreplaceable qualities that made you genuinely extraordinary to them are allowed to become vague, general, the kind of qualities that, in the constructed reality, other people also have, that will be available again in some future connection, that were not, in other words, as rare as they felt in the moment of having them. It has a version of itself, of the avoidant, that is intact, self-sufficient in the way it has always claimed to be, not damaged by the leaving, not diminished by the loss, moving through the world with the same basic adequacy that it moved through the world before you arrived in it. Fine, functional, whole in the specific, defended, nothing is missing way that the self-sufficiency narrative requires. This constructed reality holds. It is not a fragile thing. It has been built with real materials, maintained with genuine effort, reinforced by every day that passes in which the avoidant does not reach and the distance remains, and the life continues without the intervention of anything that challenges the story. It holds until the move. What the move actually is, the move is not a tactic that needs to be established immediately and returned to repeatedly, because the moment it becomes a tactic, the moment it is deployed strategically with the specific intention of producing a particular response in the avoidant, it stops being the thing that works and becomes the thing that doesn't. The move is a state of being that becomes visible. Specifically, it is the visible, undeniable, cannot be explained away evidence that you are genuinely okay. Not performing okay, not the bravely public display of moving on that is recognizable as a performance to anyone paying attention. Not the suspiciously accelerated flourishing of someone who is working very hard to demonstrate that they are flourishing. Actually okay. Genuinely, quietly, organically okay, in the specific way that people become okay when they have grieved fully and built genuinely and arrived, without particularly intending to arrive anywhere, at a version of themselves that is more completely theirs than any previous version. The move is you, having done the work, having built the life, having become the person the silence was turning you into, simply existing in your full, self-possessed, genuinely occupied with your own life way, visible enough that it registers, undeniable enough that the constructed reality cannot absorb it, real enough that the edited version of you, the avoidant, has been maintaining in their interior, cannot survive the contact with the actual you. That is the move. Being so genuinely, completely unperformatively yourself that the story they built around the diminished version of you simply cannot hold. Why this specific thing breaks their reality? The constructed reality depends fundamentally on a specific belief about you, the belief that you are at your core organized around them, not consciously. The avoidant does not walk around thinking, she is waiting for me, he is still hoping I'll come back. That thought would be too uncomfortable, too flattering, too close to acknowledging the importance of the attachment they have been working to minimize. But underneath the conscious narrative, embedded in the architecture of the constructed reality, is this assumption that you are still, in the essential way, the person who loved them and was hurt by the leaving and has not fully reorganized around your own center. That the attachment is still live on your side in a way that makes you, however independently you appear to be living, still fundamentally responsive to them. This assumption is the load-bearing wall of the constructed reality. It is what makes the reality feel safe to inhabit, because if you are still organized around them, still affected, still hoping, still carrying the connection as your primary emotional weather, then they have not actually lost anything. They have only created distance from something that is still there, still available, still waiting in the way that things wait when they have nowhere else to go. The constructed reality is sustainable as long as that assumption holds, and the move breaks the assumption, not by performing indifference to contradict it, not by displaying a convincing happiness that could be interpreted as wanting them to see how well you are doing, but by the specific, unperformative, cannot be constructed quality of someone who has genuinely reorganized, someone whose center is no longer them. When that lands, when the avoidance system receives unambiguous evidence that you are not organized around them, that your life has a genuine and self-generated momentum that is not waiting for their participation, that the attachment they assumed was still live on your side has been, however painfully, genuinely transformed. The load-bearing wall cracks, and the reality built on top of it does too. What breaks first? The first thing that breaks is not the most dramatic. It is the most fundamental. The story about you breaks first. The edited version, the made more ordinary version, the she's good but not irreplaceable version, the qualities she had exist in other people version, cannot survive the contact with the reality of who you are now. Because who you are now is more, not less, more complete, more genuinely self-possessed, more fully inhabiting the specific and irreducible qualities that made you extraordinary to them in the first place. But now, without the anxiety that was also present then, without the reaching that was also present then. You are all of what you were, and none of what made you easier to leave. The self-contained, I can find this elsewhere version of you that was maintained in the constructed reality encounters the actual you, whole, grounded, genuinely fine, and the maintenance becomes impossible. You are not ordinary. You were never ordinary to them. The editing was always a necessary fiction rather than a genuine reassessment. And fictions, when the real thing is directly visible, are very difficult to maintain. The story about you breaks, and in its breaking, it pulls at the story about everything else. What breaks second? The second thing that breaks is the story about the relationship. The edited version, smaller than it was, more limited than it was. The version in which the complications were central and the connection was real but insufficient cannot survive the evidence of who you became inside it and after it, because who you became, the specific growth, the specific depth, the specific qualities that this relationship, for all its cost, produced in you, is visible in who you are now. It is in how you carry yourself, in the groundedness that was built in the silence, in the self-possession that arrived through the grief, in the particular quality of someone who has been all the way inside something real and difficult and come out knowing themselves more completely than before. The avoidant, encountering you now, is encountering the evidence of what the relationship was, not the edited version. The actual version, the relationship that was deep enough, real enough, significant enough to produce this, to be part of the making of the person standing in front of them. Relationships that produce this are not relationships that were limited, are not relationships that were real but insufficient, are not the kind of relationship that the edited version was claiming it was. The story about the relationship breaks, and what remains, in the rubble of the edited version, is the actual memory, the unedited one, the one that has been stored intact below the level of the construction, waiting for the moment when the construction could no longer suppress it, the moments of genuine meeting, the times the walls came down, the version of themselves they were in your presence, the specific and irreplaceable quality of what was between you. All of it surfaces, not gradually, with the sudden and overwhelming completeness of something that has been held back by a structure that has just failed. What breaks third? The third thing that breaks is the story about themselves, the self-sufficient, nothing is missing, fine without you story. This is the hardest break, the most consequential, the most destabilizing, and it breaks last because it is the most protected, the most load-bearing, the most central to the avoidance functional identity. But it cannot survive what the first two breaks have produced, because if the story about you is wrong, if you are not ordinary, not replaceable, not the edited version they have been maintaining, then the decision to create the distance was not wisdom, was not the appropriate response to an insufficient connection, was not the clear-eyed recognition of incompatibility that the self-sufficiency narrative required it to be. It was fear, running as it always runs, on the old program, toward the old exit. And if the story about the relationship is wrong, if it was not limited but significant, not insufficient, but real and deep and worth the cost of staying, then the leaving was not a decision made from clarity. It was the pattern, doing what the pattern does. And if the leaving was the pattern rather than a decision, if the self-sufficiency narrative was not wisdom but the oldest defense mechanism in the system, then the self-sufficient, nothing is missing version of themselves is not the truth. It is the wound, wearing the costume of identity. The third story breaks, and what the avoidant is left with in the aftermath of all three breaks is something they have very rarely been left with in their life. Themselves, without the construction, without the narrative, without the managed, edited, self-sufficient version that has been running in place of the actual interior for as long as they can remember. Just themselves, with the wound visible, with the wanting visible, with the love that refuses suddenly refusing louder than it has since the early days of the leaving, broken open. What they experience in the breaking is not a peaceful experience. It arrives with the specific quality of cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding two incompatible things simultaneously and being unable to resolve them in the direction of the comfortable one. The constructed reality and the actual reality, the edited version and the undeniable version, the self-sufficient narrative and the visceral evidence of its insufficiency. The avoidance system, which has spent enormous resources maintaining the construction, now has to do something it has very limited practice doing. It has to let the incompatibility resolve in the direction of truth rather than comfort. This is disorienting, genuinely functionally disorienting, the kind of disorientation that does not respond to the usual management strategies, cannot be addressed by creating more distance, because the evidence that broke the reality is not in the physical proximity of you. It is now inside them, in the irreversible understanding that has arrived, in the memory that the construction was suppressing and that is now surfacing fully. They cannot manage their way back to the constructed reality. The architecture has failed. The story will not hold. And what they are left with, in the disorientation, in the rubble of the construction, in the specific and unfamiliar experience of being without the narrative they have been living inside, is a question, not a rhetorical question, not a philosophical question, a real, urgent, immediately relevant question. What now? What the avoidant does with the breaking. Some avoidance, in the aftermath of the breaking, reach. Not the oblique, deniable, plausibly not what it is reaching of earlier retreats and tentative returns. Something more direct than that. Something that carries the specific weight of someone who has had their reality broken and is reaching from that broken place rather than from the managed walls intact place they were reaching from before. The reaching looks different. It has a quality of urgency that was absent before, a willingness to be slightly more explicit, not fully, not with the complete vulnerability that would require a fundamental rewiring they have not yet done, but more than before. More honest about the fact that the contact is not casual, more willing to acknowledge, however obliquely, that something has shifted. They may say something that surprises you, something that does not fit the pattern of how they have communicated throughout the relationship, something that is, relative to their usual register, unexpectedly direct. An acknowledgement, a reference to the relationship that does not minimize it, an expression of something that, filtered through the avoidance limited facility with emotional language, nonetheless communicates what it is trying to communicate, that they see you, that they have seen what they had, that the constructed reality is gone, and what is left, in its absence, is the truth of the connection and the truth of what the leaving cost. Some avoidance reach this way, and the reaching, when it comes from the broken place, rather than the managed place, is qualitatively different from everything that came before. Other avoidance do not reach. The breaking happens fully, really, in the interior, and they do not convert it into action. The disorientation of the broken reality does not produce the move toward you because the system, even cracked, still has enough residual architecture to prevent the reach. The fear is still present. The vulnerability of reaching from a broken place is more than the system can currently authorize. They sit with the breaking, alone, in the private, unwitnessed, never to be communicated to you interior of their own experience. And the breaking does its work there, slowly, without the external evidence of reaching, without any behavior change that would be visible to you. But real, the constructed reality does not get rebuilt in exactly the same form. Something has been permanently altered in the architecture, something that will continue to work on them, however invisibly, however slowly, however without the resolution of the story arriving in a form that gives you anything useful. Both outcomes are real, both are possible, and which one happens is not within your control and cannot be predicted from the outside. The move is not about making them reach. This is the part that requires the most emphasis, the part that is most easily lost in the retelling of this, the part that, if lost, converts something genuinely significant into something merely strategic. the move, the genuine okayness, the authentic self-possession, the real and visible and unperformed flourishing of someone who has done the work and built the life and arrived at a version of themselves more completely than before, is not about making the avoidant reach. It is not a technique for breaking their reality as a means to an end. It is the end that this entire experience has been building toward, not the avoidant reaching, not the resolution of the story in a satisfying direction. You, genuinely okay, actually fine, really, specifically, organically, yourself, in the full and uncompromising and unapologetic sense. That is the destination. Not because it happens to also be the thing that breaks the avoidance reality, although it does, but because it is the thing that was always worth arriving at, regardless of what it produces in them. Because the version of you that is genuinely self-possessed, genuinely occupied with your own life, genuinely no longer organized around their presence, that version of you is the one that is capable of the love and the life that are actually available to you. Not the love of this relationship necessarily, not the life that includes them necessarily, the love that comes from fullness, the life that is entirely irreducibly yours. That version of you is the move, and it breaks their reality as a side effect, as the natural consequence of the actual thing encountering the constructed version, and the constructed version being insufficient to survive the contact. But the breaking is not the point. You are the point. You, fully arrived, fully yourself, no longer waiting, no longer organized around their readiness or unreadiness, no longer holding yourself in the suspended state of someone whose life resumes when the story resolves. Just you, alive, present, real, moving forward, not because the story has the ending it deserved, but because the story is yours, and the moving is yours, and the life that comes next is more genuinely and completely yours than anything that came before. That is the move. That is the only move that was ever worth making. And you have been making it imperfectly, non-linearly, without knowing that is what you were doing, since the moment you finally, fully, with everything it cost, put down the weight of trying to make someone capable of the love they couldn't hold. You put it down, and in the putting down, you picked up yourself. That is the move. That is the whole of it. That is everything. Avoidant psychology. One move that completely broke their reality, continued. Something needs to be said about what happens after the move. Not in the avoidant. That has been covered. The breaking of the constructed reality. The surfacing of the suppressed truth. The specific disorientation of someone whose interior architecture has failed them. The avoidance experience of the aftermath has been named. What hasn't been named is yours. Because the move, the genuine okayness, the authentic self-possession, the real and unperformed arrival at a version of yourself that is more completely yours than anything that came before, does not arrive without its own complicated interior weather, does not come cleanly without ambivalence, without the specific and disorienting experience of becoming someone who is genuinely fine, while also genuinely still carrying everything that the not being fine period contained. The arrival at okay is not the end of complexity. It is the beginning of a different kind of complexity. The kind that belongs to someone who is no longer in survival mode, but has not yet fully inhabited the life that survival mode was protecting them long enough to build. That transition, from surviving to inhabiting, is where this continues. The strange territory of actually being okay. Nobody adequately describes what it feels like to actually arrive at okay after something this significant. The expectation, built from the cultural narrative around healing, is that okay feels like relief, like the lifting of a weight, like the specific brightness of someone who has come through something difficult and is now, unambiguously, on the other side of it. The healing narrative promises a discernible transition from the grief period to the heal period, marked by something legible, a moment of clarity, a shift in the emotional weather, a morning you wake up and know, with certainty, that the worst is behind you. The actual experience is stranger than that. less legible, more textured. Because actually being okay, when it arrives, does not feel like the end of the grief. It feels like the grief becoming part of the landscape rather than the whole of it. The loss is still there. The love that refuses is still there. The specific and irreducible missing of someone who was genuinely real to you does not disappear because you have arrived at functional. It simply changes its position, moves from the foreground, where it was the primary organizing fact of your daily experience, to somewhere more peripheral, present but no longer governing, there but no longer the whole of what is there. And alongside it, occupying the space that the foreground grief has vacated, is the life, the actual, ongoing, genuinely inhabited life that was being built in the silence and the healing and the slow reconstruction of a self that was not organized around their presence, the life that is yours. And the strangeness of actually being okay is partly the strangeness of encountering that life fully for the first time, of living in it rather than constructing it, of being present in it rather than building toward it as a future destination. You are here, in the life. Okay. And the okay is real, and also complicated, and also sometimes indistinguishable, in certain moments and in certain lights, from a sadness that is different from grief. Not the sharp sadness of active loss, but the quieter sadness of having come through something significant and finding, on the other side, that the coming through was real, but did not make the thing that was lost any less real. This is okay. This is in fact what okay actually looks like when it is genuine rather than performed. Not the erasure of complexity, the capacity to hold complexity without being undone by it. What you notice about yourself now, there are things you notice about yourself in this territory that were not available to notice before, not because they were not true before, they were, but because they require the specific vantage point of having moved through something significant to be visible. You notice that you are harder to destabilize than you used to be, not harder in the defended sense, not armored, but genuinely more rooted, the specific quality of someone who has been through a destabilizing experience and discovered, in the being through it, that they were survivable, that the floor held, that the thing they were most afraid of, the full weight of the loss, the grief without the buffer of hope, the experience of being without someone who was genuinely real to them, was endurable. Not comfortable, not without cost, but endurable. And that discovery, the experiential, body level, cannot be argued with knowledge that you can endure, changes the fundamental quality of your daily navigation. Things that would have activated the anxiety before, the uncertainty of new connections, the risk of genuine investment, the vulnerability of allowing someone to matter, register differently now, not without weight, but without the specific terror of someone who does not yet know they can survive the worst available outcome. You have survived a worst available outcome, not the worst possible in any objective sense, but the worst that this particular attachment could produce. And you are here, functioning, building, more yourself than you were before it. That knowledge is structural. It is not a thought you have. It is something that has been incorporated into the actual architecture of how you move through the world. You carry it without needing to think about it. It is simply there, underneath everything. The specific confidence of someone who has tested the floor and found it holds. You notice that your relationship to love has changed. Not that you love less, not that the capacity for deep connection has been diminished by having had it cost you something real, but the quality of how you approach love is different, less desperate, less organized around the fear of losing it before it has been fully had, less contaminated by the urgency that comes from someone who needs love to work in order to be okay. You do not need love to be okay anymore. You are already okay. And the love that comes from that place, freely chosen, genuinely given, not bargained with or performed for or held together with the specific tension of someone who cannot afford to lose it, That love has a different quality, more spacious, more generous, more capable of the patience and the presence that genuine intimacy requires. You notice that you are more genuinely curious about other people, not in the way you were curious before, not the curious that was partly a scanning for whether this person is capable of the depth you need, whether this connection will be safe, whether this is someone whose potential unavailability you should be managing in advance, but a simpler, more open, less agenda-laden curiosity, the curiosity of someone who is genuinely interested in the interior lives of other people, because their own interior life is rich enough that the interest is generative rather than hungry. That quality of curiosity, spacious, unguarded, not contaminated by need, is one of the most genuinely attractive things a person can carry, and you are carrying it now, not as a technique, as the natural expression of someone who has done real work and arrived at genuine wholeness. The relationship that becomes possible. Now there is a relationship available to you now that was not available before this experience, not despite what you went through. Because of it, not a consolation relationship, not the relationship that is merely better than what you had, the way any warm room seems warm when you have just come in from the cold. A genuinely different quality of relationship, one that is possible specifically because of who you have become. The groundedness, the self-possession, the love that comes from fullness, the curiosity that is generative rather than hungry. This relationship will feel different from the beginning, not the specific electricity of the anxious avoidant dynamic, which was real but was partly the electricity of activated attachment wounds meeting each other. Not the urgency, not the push-pull, not the specific aliveness of loving someone who is just slightly out of reach. Different. The aliveness in this relationship will not come from uncertainty. It will come from genuine encounter, from the specific and quieter but more sustaining experience of being actually met by someone whose presence does not require you to manage your expression, whose consistency does not produce in you the low-level vigilance of someone waiting for the withdrawal, whose love arrives without the filtration of a nervous system that experiences intimacy as threat. It will feel, at first, almost too simple, almost too available. The absence of the familiar tension, the reading of silences, the calibration of expression, the ongoing calculation of how much of yourself is safe to show will register as something missing before it registers as something gained. This is important to know in advance, because the simplicity of a secure relationship, when first encountered by someone who has been inside the anxious avoidant dynamic, can feel like flatness, like the absence of depth, like something that is good, but not quite right. It is not flatness. It is the absence of anxiety. And the absence of anxiety, when anxiety has been so long present that it was mistaken for depth, feels like loss before it feels like freedom. Give it time. Give it the specific patience of someone who knows the difference between what they need and what their nervous system has been trained to reach for. Let the simplicity become what it actually is, not the absence of something real, but the presence of something sustainable, something that does not require you to be in a constant state of managed hope to maintain. The depth in this relationship will be real, just located differently, not in the tension but in the actual knowing of each other, in the accumulated, unhurried, present tense experience of two people who are both genuinely there, both with their flaws intact, both capable of the love they feel. That is the relationship that is available to you now, not someday, now, as you are, with the grief still present in its peripheral, no longer governing form, with the love for the avoidance still there, still refusing, still real, and no longer in the way of what is also real, the future. What to do when the avoidance reality breaking produces contact? This needs to be addressed directly, because it is the most practically urgent part of this conversation for many people reading it. The avoidant, whose reality has been broken, will, in many cases, reach out. The contact will come, in the oblique form or in the more direct form, depending on the specific degree of their breaking and the specific courage of their reaching. And when it comes, you will have to respond from somewhere. The question is where. Here is what responding from the right place requires. It requires that you know the difference in your own body between the you that is genuinely okay and the you that is performing okayness over a substrate of still active hoping. Because the genuinely okay you and the performing you will both receive the contact differently, will both be moved by it differently, will both be at risk of different errors. The genuinely okay you is at risk of treating the contact as simpler than it is, of receiving it warmly, as one genuine person receiving the genuine reaching of another, without the full accounting of what the contact means and what it would require and whether the change it implies is real or situational. The performing you is at risk of the flood, of converting the contact immediately into the resolution of the story, of treating the reality breaking as the breakthrough that changes everything, that signals readiness. That means the work has been done and the dynamic has shifted, and what is now available is the relationship that was always possible if only the fear had been less loud. Neither of these is the right place to respond from. The right place is the clear-eyed, fully informed, genuinely self-possessed place, the place that receives the contact with warmth, because warmth is who you are, and the contact deserves it. And also with the specific patience of someone who knows the difference between the breaking of a reality and the building of a new one. The breaking happened. That is real. The realization is real. The changed quality of the reaching is real. But realization is not transformation. And transformation, the specific, worked for, showed in behavior over time kind, is what this relationship requires if it is going to be genuinely different. Watch for the transformation, not the reaching. The reaching is the beginning of the willingness. The transformation is the evidence that the willingness is being converted into actual change. Transformation looks like consistency over time, like showing up in the ordinary moments, not just the moments of acute loss, like being present when the intimacy deepens, rather than creating distance when the alarm fires, like doing the specific work, therapeutic or otherwise, of addressing the root of the pattern rather than managing its symptoms. Watch for that from the genuinely okay place, from the place that has its own life, its own floor, its own forward momentum that is not paused pending their transformation. From that place, you can engage with what is real without being organized around what is hoped for. From that place, the contact can be received honestly, with warmth and with clear eyes and with the specific self-possession of someone who knows their own worth and will not, again, discount it in exchange for the proximity of someone who is still in process. The things that were yours all along in the accumulated weight of this entire conversation, across every script, every continuation, every layer of psychology and grief and healing and becoming, something has been present the whole time that deserves to be named directly before anything else is said. The things that made you capable of this love were always yours. The depth of feeling, the capacity for genuine attunement, the specific quality of seeing another person clearly, wound and all, and remaining. The patience that was sometimes excessive but came from genuine generosity. The willingness to stay soft when hardening would have been simpler. The love that refused to stop. All of that was yours before the avoidant, was not produced by the avoidant, was not the result of the relationship or the dynamic or the specific education of loving someone whose system could not hold what they felt. It was already in you. The relationship found it, tested it, sometimes exploited it, sometimes saw it clearly and was briefly, genuinely nourished by it, before the fear overrode the nourishment. But it was always yours, and it is still yours, unchanged in its essential quality, refined perhaps by what it has been through, more integrated, more boundaried, more clearly yours in the specific sense of being expressed from a place of genuine choice rather than compulsion. But yours, completely. Still, the love you are capable of, the full, clear-seeing, undefended, genuinely present love that you brought to the avoidant and that their system could not fully receive. That love is not used up, is not diminished by having been poured into something that could not hold it all, is not evidence of a flaw in you that it was not received the way it deserved. It is simply the most significant quality you carry, the most valuable thing available to the right person in the right relationship, in the right configuration of two people who are both, in their own ways, actually capable of what they feel. That love is still in you, waiting not to be spent. It was never about spending, waiting to be met, and the person capable of meeting it, of receiving the full, unmanaged, genuinely offered quality of what you carry, exists, is real, is not a consolation prize or a hypothetical, or a story you tell yourself to survive the specific grief of having loved someone whose system couldn't hold it, is a genuine possibility made more accessible by everything you have been through, by the groundedness you built, by the self-possession you cultivated, by the floor you poured in the silence, by the specific and irreplaceable education of having loved all the way and survived the loving. The last thing about the move. There is one more thing about the move. The genuine okayness, the real self-possession, the authentic arrival at a version of yourself that broke the avoidance constructed reality simply by being undeniably real. It was never for them. Not the arriving at okay, not the building of the life, not the cultivation of the groundedness or the self-possession or the genuine occupation of your own existence that made the move what it was. None of it was for them. It was for you. All of it. Every piece of the work, every piece of the building, every piece of the slow and imperfect and non-linear process of becoming someone who is genuinely okay after something genuinely difficult. It was for you. And the fact that it also broke their reality, that it also disrupted the constructed version of you that their system had been maintaining, that it also produced in them the specific and irreversible recognition of what they had. That is a side effect, a real side effect, a significant one that matters and deserves to be acknowledged and may produce outcomes worth paying attention to. But a side effect. The main effect, the primary outcome, the thing this was always actually about, is you, standing in your own life, grounded in your own floor, carrying the love that refuses without being governed by it, building the future that belongs entirely to you, capable of the relationship that is actually available to you, worthy, in the most fundamental and unshakable sense, of being loved well. That is what the move produced, not their reality breaking. Yours being built, complete, inhabited, genuinely, finally, irreversibly yours. That is the move. That is everything. And you are already making it. You have been making it since the very beginning of all of this, since the first moment you chose to understand rather than to simply be heard, to grow rather than simply to survive, to become rather than simply to endure. You were always making the move. You just didn't know yet that it was going to break something and build something, and that the something it was building, slowly, imperfectly, one ordinary day at a time, was you, completely, finally, home.